Imagine conquering the known world before you turn 30, only to die suddenly, leaving behind an empire so vast that it implodes the moment you take your last breath. His story reveals a specific psychological trajectory. The very traits that enabled his rise became the architects of his end. By analyzing the cracks in Alexander's leadership, we can see how modern power is built and how easily it can be undone. Alexander grew up under crushing expectations. His father was a feared king who had already built a formidable state. For the young prince, succeeding meant achieving perfection. There's an early story that illustrates his reaction to this pressure. A massive, furious warhorse named Bucephalus was brought to the court. Older, battle-hardened warriors tried to break it using sheer physical force, and every single one was thrown to the dirt. But Alexander stepped up and simply watched. He realized the animal wasn't actually wild, it was frightened by its own shadow. He walked over and turned the horse to face the sun. The shadow fell behind it. The panicked animal instantly calmed down, and Alexander mounted it, shocking the onlookers. By removing the shadow, he bypassed a barrier everyone else considered fixed. This mindset allowed him to solve problems that paralyzed older men, but it also cemented a belief that any obstacle could be dissolved if he simply refused to accept its limits. When he took the throne at 20 years old, he ignored the safe path of consolidating his power. Instead, he immediately marched his army to attack the largest, wealthiest empire on the planet. He didn't direct his troops from a safe distance. He rode directly into the chaos, risking his own life in the thick of the fighting. His soldiers saw him bleed, and in return, they gave him their complete loyalty. As he toppled rival nations, he absorbed their customs. The Egyptians crowned him a living deity, and the Persians hailed him King of Kings. He was minting his own divine profile into the currency of a vast new world. When a leader strings together an unbroken chain of victories, control warps into a toxic delusion. He began to operate under an invincibility complex, seeing his success as proof of divinity. This shift transformed his greatest asset, his boundless ambition, into a blind spot. He was no longer a strategist managing risks. He was a believer in his own myth. Driven by a need for constant expansion, he forced his troops into unknown territories. They marched through jagged mountains and unforgiving climates that offered no food and constant danger. These men had been fighting for years. They buried their friends and family in foreign dirt, heavily scarred and exhausted, with no end in sight. Eventually, the momentum broke. His once loyal veterans openly mutinied, questioning why they were still bleeding and refusing to take another step east. His momentum finally stalled. The men who had fought across continents simply stopped, forcing the most successful commander in history to turn back because his own ranks had reached their breaking point. The drive for more had finally collided with the physical limits of human endurance. For the first time, the myth of his invincibility had failed to overcome reality. By the time the army returned to Babylon, the vital energy of the empire had vanished. The machine of conquest had stalled out. Then a sudden illness took hold. Over a few agonizing days, the world's most powerful man lost the strength to stand up, let alone hold a sword or issue a command. As he lay dying, his inner circle of generals gathered around his bed. They desperately needed a plan to govern the massive territories they had just conquered. They asked him who should inherit the empire. Instead of naming an heir or an administrative council, he gave a final ego-driven answer: to the strongest. That three-word answer effectively dismantled the unity of his empire. By prioritizing a final display of his own competitive philosophy over a clear, stable plan for the future, he left his conquests without a way to survive his absence. The empire fractured almost overnight. Without a designated leader, his closest friends and top commanders turned their armies against one another, plunging the world into decades of chaos. Alexander's strength remained intact, but his judgment did not. By the time he reached Babylon, he had spent years convinced he was invulnerable, ignoring the fragility of the borders he had drawn. It repeats, again and again and again. Different names, different empires, the rapid rise, the swelling ego, and the resulting collapse. Power without structure is just a countdown to failure. The moment you believe you are untouchable is the moment your downfall is guaranteed.